Hi everyone, welcome back to Belle's Books. I'm Carly and today I'm introducing a new series for my channel all about experimental writing. Firstly, apologies if you can hear some guitar playing and singing. It's Dan downstairs. He's playing a bit of George Michael. Why not? It's Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day, by the way. Bringing you all of the love. Okay, anyway, so today is just an intro about this series that I want to do, and it is in tandem with my PhD because my PhD that I'm studying at Birkbeck in London is looking at women's experimental writing, so not just fiction, because I'm looking at non-fiction as well. And my research is reading that through a postmodern philosophical concept. Katie has got up, she's turning around. It's all right, she's sat back down. It's fine. Anyway, so this series I want to do partly because I want to spread the love for experimental writing because I do love it, and partly because it's going to help me. So one of the reading targets that I've set myself this year is to read more experimental writing for context around my research. So as well as like the main text that I'm looking at in my research, I want to read more like kind of backlist experimental writing. And this series, I'm hoping I can then talk to you about those books that I'm reading, and it will help me with my research, and hopefully it will spread the love for experimental writing as a genre. Now, I know that experimental writing is not for everyone, okay? I get it. It's kind of niche, and lots of people are like, I can't deal with that. It's too much. I totally understand. So part of the reason that I want to do this is because I want to try and show people that it's not just really difficult and highbrow and something for academics to look at. I know I'm looking at it in terms of research, I know, but I think it can be read just generally by everybody, and so that's what I want to do, is to make it a little bit more accessible. So my plan is to talk about primarily the books that I'm looking at for as part of my research, which are, as I've mentioned before, the Ali Smith Seasonal Quartet. Now, I know there's lots of love for that in the booktube community and in general, so that's a good start. And then go on to the other books that I'm looking at for my PhD, which is Happy by Nicola Barker, The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson, and on the more difficult side of the scale, Girl is a Half-Formed Thing by Emma McBride. So I'm going to talk about those books and not do like a massively academic in-depth analysis, but I just want to talk about them and talk about why I like them and what they do for me as a reader. So I'm trying to keep this broad and general. I'm not doing an academic deep dive into it. But for this intro, I just wanted to talk to you about why I like experimental writing so much. Because like I say, I know people struggle with it and it's not for everybody. And some people are really kind of put off by anything that experimental that does different things. And also, I'm thinking about the term experimental writing because that can encompass lots of different things, and what that term does to people's kind of thoughts about a text when it's categorized as experimental. So one of the reasons that I like experimental writing is because it makes me engage with the text in a different way. So like when I'm reading any book that's a regular kind of, whether it's realist or sci-fi or fantasy, I just go along for the story, and I love that. Don't get me wrong, I am here for that most of the time. I want to be absorbed by a story. I want to sit back, let the author take me where they want to take me, and follow along and get to the end and be like, that was good, or whatever I thought about that. But with experimental writing, it makes me engage in a different way because I feel like I am drawn into the text and I'm a player in the text, so I have to engage my brain in a different way to engage with this text, because I just can't read an experimental book for the story or the plot or the characters, because usually that's not what it's about. And experimental writing makes you think harder than you usually would if you're having to read something else, I guess. That's what it does for me anyway. So I'm not knocking, don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking anything else, because like I say, I am here for any kind of regular narrative. But the way that experimental writing like uses language or does something different with form, the way that it plays with form, and in the case of Emma McBride, when she plays with language, she doesn't use real words sometimes. She makes up words or she alters sentence structure. That makes me have to go, wait, what's going on here? And I have to think differently. And I really like that as a practice of reading. Not all the time, and I definitely can't deal with it all the time. Like, and I've spoken about this before in one of the books that I picked up last year it's up there, Murmur by Will Eaves. And I was just not in the headspace for it at all. I couldn't deal with it because it required me to work harder and do something and engage my brain. And I was just like, I'm not here for that right now. I couldn't do it. I didn't have the head capacity for it. But when I am in that mood and I can deal with it, I find it a really rich reading experience. And one thing that's kind of proved that to me a little bit is I've been participating in the seasonal quartet read along that is hosted by Sarah over at Hardcover Hearts. I'll link her channel in the description box below. We're currently reading Spring for this month, and it's been fantastic for me as a researcher anyway to listen to other people's thoughts on the Ali Smith seasonal quartet, because they've been so diverse and different and just really enriching to hear from other people and what they take from each section of the book as we read it each week, and that's been fantastic. So it really makes you think about things differently. That's what I find anyway, and that's the feedback I've got from this group read along. And also experimental writing makes me question myself and my own assumptions. So like when we're talking about certain themes that are dealt with in experimental writing, like I'm going to keep going back to Ali Smith because that's what I'm reading at the moment. She deals a lot with time in her books and the human experience of temporality and how we live through time. And what she does with that in those novels is it makes you really consider your own experience with time and how you relate to it. And I know that's been even more prevalent in the way that we've thought about it recently with the pandemic and being in lockdown, and the way that our time structures of days and nights and going to work and coming home have been completely thrown out the window, and it's really affected us. But when I read these novels, it does something similar. It makes me think about, well, why do I frame my experience around this particular assumption or this particular way of doing and being? And it just kind of gives you a different perspective, and maybe, it doesn't necessarily give you an answer. It just makes you question things. And that's what I really love about experimental writing, the way it makes you question things that you kind of take for granted or you don't even think about half the time, the structures that we live by. Okay, and the other thing it does, and part of that reading experience, is that it makes me work harder as a reader and it develops my critical skills. And yes, you do get that when you read other texts as well, because you can interpret a text any way you like and you can analyze it and think. And when you're particularly like with book groups, if you're reading, I've had this before in my book group where we're reading a book and it's not experimental, and all of us will have different interpretations and we'll think about it differently, and someone will say, oh, I thought this bit was about death or this theme or something, and I'll be like, oh, I totally didn't get that. And no doubt you get that with any text, but with experimental writing, I find I have to work harder and I have to really develop my critical skills. Dan is coming upstairs. And sometimes it does stay with me longer than other books. Sometimes it doesn't. But they're some of the reasons that I like experimental writing. Also, I'm going to talk about a few of the books that I'm using for my research, like secondary critical works, and that some of these are a little bit academic, but the one that I would really recommend is this. It's Experimental Fiction by Julie Armstrong. This is a very short book, and it's fantastic because it gives you a rundown of, a very short rundown, and it doesn't cover everything, of like a little history, a potted history of experimental writing. So it talks about the Beats and the modernists and postmodernism, but it's really accessible, and it's a book that's great for people that want to know more about experimental fiction, and if you want to write it. So this is both a guide for writers because it gives you exercises to do if you would like to try writing experimentally, and that's really fun as well. So so just to give you an example, at the beginning it's got why read, I've highlighted some stuff here, why read experimental fiction, and how does a reader approach experimental fiction. It's very easy to read, and like I say, if you fancy having a go at it, there's some exercises that she gives you to do at the end of each chapter, which is marvellous, and further reading suggestions. So if you would like to dip your toes in the water of experimental writing, I would highly recommend this book. It's fantastic. And one of my key texts that I keep going back to for my research. And particularly because I'm looking at women's experimental writing, I've got a couple of books here that are just about women's experimental writing. Breaking the Sequence, Women's Experimental Fiction. This is a collection edited by Ellen Friedman and Miriam Fuchs. And so these are essays, individual essays about individual writers of experimental fiction. Let me give you an example of who we've got in here. We've got Dorothy Richardson. We've got Virginia Woolf, of course. We've got Jean Rhys on Wide Sargasso Sea, which is one of my favourite books. And lots of people that I have not read, which is why I want to go through this year and read some of these people. Like HD. I think she might have been a poet as well. Who else we got? Marguerite Young, Kathy Acker, classic Kathy Acker. And lots of other people who I have not read and I would like to. So this one, and also Women's Experimental Writing, Negative Aesthetics and Feminist Critique. Again, this is a bit more academic, and this is edited by, is it Ellen Berry? Or is it written by her? I don't even know. No, I think it's entirely written by her. Again, this is a collection of essays about different writers and what they do. So again, we've got Kathy Acker in here, and some more people that I've not heard of. So I don't want to talk too much in this intro because it's just an intro. I would like to hear from you. I know lots of people are going to be turned off by this. But if you're interested, drop me some questions in the comments below. I would like to know what you would like to know. Do you have any questions? How can I help spread the love for experimental writing? If you absolutely hate it, tell me why you hate it. I want to hear that too. So like I say, I'm going to talk about the books that I'm studying and the books that I'm going to read as contextual research around my main texts, like backlist books. And I just want to know, what can I do to make people get interested in experimental writing? If you've got anything to say, tell me. I want to know. All right, guys, I will speak to you very soon. Have a lovely Valentine's Day and evening. I'm sending you all lots of love. Till next time. Bye.